If you want to understand the modern history and political geography of Micronesia, then it is crucial that we understand the political entity known as the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, in which 3 sovereign states and a U.S. territory emerged from, Guahusipulan. And in order to explain the TTPI, we must start at the outbreak of World War I, when in 1914, Japan, an ally of the United Kingdom, seized the German possessions in Micronesia. At the end of the war, the newly formed international organization, the League of Nations, established the mandate system under Article 22 of the Covenant. Former colonies and territories of the defeated powers became mandates which were administered by victors of the war. On December 17, 1920, the German colonial holdings north of the equator in the Pacific were placed under the administration of Japan as a Class C mandate. Japan's mandate excluded Guam, Nauru, and Kiribati because they were not German Pacific possessions north of the equator. And it is Japan's League of Nations mandate that would form the basis of the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands. 2 decades later, the Second World War erupted, and at the end of World War II, the defeated Japan lost territorial control of their League of Nations mandate. The successor to the League of Nations, the United Nations, established the International Trusteeship System in accordance with Article 75 of the UN Charter. The way the UN trusteeship system operates is that a UN member state would make an agreement with the UN to take the responsibility for the administration of a territory whose peoples have not attained a full measure of self-government. Under Article 76, the objectives of the administering power is to promote the political and economic advancement of the territory for self-government or independence. Once an agreement has been made between the UN and the UN member state regarding the territory in question, the administering power has a sacred trust with the inhabitants of the territory to fulfill its responsibilities in accordance with Articles 73 and 76. Hence the name Trust Territory. So the purpose of the trusteeship or trust territory is to be a transitional arrangement until self-government or independence is achieved for the territory. Under Article 77, the trusteeship system may apply to League of Nations mandates. Subsequently, Japan's former mandated territories in the Pacific were placed under UN trusteeship. On April 2, 1947, the Pacific Territory was placed under the administration of the U.S. as the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands. Thus, the TTPI was a direct successor to Japan's mandates. The TTPI was one of 11 trusteeships established by the United Nations after World War II, and it was the only trust territory to be designated as a strategic trust. The difference between a normal trust and a strategic trust is that in a strategic trust, the administering power is allowed to militarily fortify and close the strategic area for security reasons. In addition, under Article 83, all functions of the United Nations related to the strategic trust are given to the UN Security Council rather than the General Assembly. The reason why the US pushed for the addition of a strategic trust in the UN Charter is in order to gain exclusive military control over the former Japanese mandated territories, because the US wanted to create a national defense zone and deny other countries from using the strategic area. Throughout most of its existence, the TTPI was under the U.S. Department of Interior, and the capital was Saipan in the Marianas District. The TTPI generally consisted of 6 administrative districts: the Marianas, Palau, Yap, Chuuk, Ponape, and the Marshalls. And it must be emphasized that all these islands were all lumped together as the TTPI, not for cultural and linguistic reasons, but only because they were part of the former Japanese League of Nations mandate, which consisted of the former German Pacific possessions north of the equator. The districts were created solely for administering such a large territory, containing about 2,100 islands scattered over some 3 million square miles of ocean. The boundaries of the districts were largely inherited from the previous colonial administration. Since the TTPI was a transitional arrangement until self-government or independence was achieved for the entire territory, it was legally expected under international law that the districts would make a unified political status decision as a single territorial unit. This is key to understand. It was the UN and US policy that districts were not allowed to make political status decisions separate from the other districts because they did not want to deal with potentially hundreds of new polities that may emerge not only from the TTPI but from the other trust territories. However, the US position changed in the early 1970s and the US began separate political status negotiations with the Marianas District, which led to heavy criticism by the UN and the international community. After Palau and the Marshalls rejected joining the Federated States of Micronesia in 1978, the US began separate political status negotiations with them as well. With the Compact of Free Association agreements with the FSM, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Covenant Agreement with the Northern Marianas, approved and ratified, on November 3, 1986, the U.S. unilaterally terminated the trusteeship agreements with the CNMI, RMI, and the FSM, as the U.S. claimed to have fulfilled its administering obligations in accordance with Articles 73 and 76 of the UN Charter. However, since under Article 83, termination of the Strategic Trust required the approval of the Security Council, the trust territory was legally still in effect. It was not until December 22nd, 1990, with the approval of the Security Council, that the trusteeship agreements for the CNMI, FSM, and RMI were officially dissolved. And 4 years later in 1994, after Palau ratified its Compact of Free Association agreements, after much dispute, the Security Council terminated the trust agreement with the Republic of Palau, and with it came the dissolution of the last remaining trust territory of the Pacific Islands. Sezus Masi for watching. Guahusipulan. Esta.